The morning of November 7th, 1902, broke cold and sharp over Hemlock's Hollow. A brittle frost clung to the skeletal branches of the ancient Appalachian trees, turning the valley into a silent, monochrome photograph. Deputy Thomas Miller felt the cold seep through his wool coat as his horse picked its way up the muddy, rutted path. He wasn't a man given to flights of fancy, but the silence that morning was unnatural. It was a heavy, oppressive thing, a weight on the air itself. The destination was his reason for the journey, the Blackwood Pines foundling home. A local trapper, Jedediah Thorne, had ridden into the town of Havenwood before dawn, his face pale and his words tumbling out in a panicked stutter. He'd gone to the orphanage to trade venison for canned goods, a weekly custom. But when he arrived, he found the place empty. Not just quiet, empty. Miller had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man too fond of his own moonshine, but the sheriff had insisted he investigate. Now, as the imposing gray stone building emerged from the mist, Miller felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. The orphanage stood like a tombstone against the bruised purple sky. No smoke rose from its chimneys. No children's laughter echoed through the pines. The great oak doors, usually barred from the inside, were slightly ajar, swinging on a creaking hinge in the biting wind. He dismounted, the crunch of his boots on the frosted ground the only sound in the world. He drew his revolver, the cold steel a small comfort against a creeping, formless dread. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding small and thin in the vast quiet. The only reply was the mournful sigh of the wind through the eaves. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, into a scene frozen in time, a tableau of a life interrupted with horrifying suddenness. The inside of Blackwood Pines was a study in macabre stillness. The main dining hall was set for breakfast. Bowls of cold, congealed porridge sat on long wooden tables, spoons resting beside them as if waiting for small hands that would never arrive. A half-eaten apple, its flesh now a sickly brown, sat by a smaller chair. In the dormitory upstairs, Miller found dozens of beds, all of them unmade, the sheets and thin blankets thrown back in haste. Small personal effects, a carved wooden bird, a tattered copy of a penny dreadful, a single child's worn leather boot, lay scattered on the floorboards. It was as if every soul in the building, some 47 children and 6 adult staff members, had simply evaporated in the middle of their morning routine. The place wasn't ransacked. Nothing of value was taken. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no bloodstains on the cold stone floors. It was a silent, orderly vanishing that was far more terrifying than any scene of violence could ever be. Deputy Miller, a man who had seen his share of grim Appalachian justice, felt a knot of cold fear tighten in his gut. This was not a crime scene as he understood it. This was something else entirely. As he moved from room to room, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows, he found the matron's office. Her logbook was open on the desk. The last entry dated the previous day, November 6th. The handwriting was neat, detailing the mundane stores received, a minor disciplinary issue, the mending of shirts. Nothing hinted at the impending cataclysm. But then, on a separate, small piece of paper tucked into the logbook's spine, Miller found it. A child's drawing, rendered in crude charcoal. It depicted the orphanage, but looming over it was a tall, impossibly thin figure with long, spindly limbs and a face that was a complete, horrifying blank. It was this simple, childish drawing that finally broke through Miller's composure, sending a genuine shiver of terror down his back. What macabre event had taken place here? Where had 53 people gone? The mystery of Blackwood Pines had just begun, and its roots, he would soon learn, were sunk deep in the cursed, forbidden soil of the hollow itself. To understand the horrifying silence of that November morning, one must first understand the isolation of Hemlock's Hollow. Tucked away deep in the unforgiving folds of the Appalachian Mountains, the valley was a world unto itself. It was a place of deep shadows and ancient whispers, where folklore was as real as the hardscrabble earth. The people who lived in the surrounding hills were insular and deeply superstitious, their beliefs a strange and potent blend of old-world fears and stern, fire-and-brimstone Christianity. They spoke of creatures that lived in the dark places of the woods, of land that was sour and held grudges. Hemlock's Hollow was considered the sourest of them all. For generations, it was a place to be avoided, a pocket of the mountains where the trees grew too close together and the sun seemed reluctant to shine. It was into this very heart of Appalachian dread that Reverend Alistair Black arrived in the spring of 1898. He was a man who seemed to be a walking contradiction. His voice was soft and hypnotic, capable of holding a congregation spellbound, yet his eyes held a cold, analytical intensity that unnerved many. He spoke of a higher purpose, a divine mission to bring light to the darkest corners of the world and to provide sanctuary for the region's forgotten children, the orphans, the unwanted, the destitute. He secured funding from anonymous, wealthy benefactors in the distant cities, and with startling speed, the Blackwood Pines foundling home was constructed. Local laborers were paid well, but they spoke in hushed tones of the Reverend's strange demands. The building's peculiar layout, the windowless room in the cellar, and the symbols, faintly reminiscent of crosses but somehow twisted and wrong, that he insisted be carved above every doorway. The orphanage was a fortress of gray stone and dark timber, a monument of misplaced hope in a valley most believed to be cursed. The children began to arrive in the summer of 1899. They were the forgotten footnotes of a harsh era, children whose parents had been lost to coal mining disasters, influenza, or the simple, grinding poverty of the mountains. To the outside world, Reverend Black was a savior. He clothed them, fed them, and provided a rudimentary education. But within the walls of Blackwood Pines, life was a strange and unsettling affair. The head matron, Elara Vance, a stern, childless widow from a town 2 states over, enforced a rigid discipline. Her rule was one of absolute order where silence was valued above all else. Yet the true strangeness came from the Reverend himself. His teachings were not of the simple gospels most of the children knew. He spoke of ancient things, of a world beneath the world, and of the great silence that awaited the truly worthy. His sermons, delivered in the orphanage's stark chapel, were filled with cryptic allegories and disturbing parables. He conducted nightly congregations, where the children were taught chants in a language that was neither Latin nor any known tongue. They learned games with complex, unsettling rules, played with stones and sticks arranged in spiral patterns. The children became withdrawn, their gazes distant. They moved with a quiet, synchronized purpose that was deeply unnerving to the few outsiders who visited. They rarely cried, and they never laughed. They spoke in whispers amongst themselves, sharing secrets in the Reverend's strange, guttural language. The orphanage was not just a home, it was an indoctrination. Alistair Black was not merely raising orphans. He was forging them into something else, preparing them for a purpose that remained a horrifying, unspoken secret, locked away behind his cold, intense eyes. The macabre truth was that the vanishing of Blackwood Pines was not a sudden event, but the final, terrifying conclusion to a long and meticulous plan. Among the 47 children who inhabited Blackwood Pines, a few stood out in the fragmented accounts pieced together later. There was Caleb, at 14 the oldest of the orphans. He was rebellious and strong-willed, a boy who remembered a life before the orphanage and bristled under the Reverend's suffocating control. He was caught more than once trying to run away, only to be brought back by the Reverend himself, who never seemed to need to search for him. Caleb would be returned not beaten, but changed, quieter, his eyes holding a new and profound fear. Then there was Lily, a small, pale girl of 8 who never spoke but communicated through her drawings. It was her sketchbook, later found by Deputy Miller, that provided the most disturbing visual record of life inside Blackwood Pines. Her early drawings were of birds and trees, but they slowly transformed. The trees gained faces, the birds had too many wings. And then the tall, faceless man began to appear in every picture, first at a distance, then closer, until he dominated every page, his presence a dark, oppressive blot of charcoal. Finally, there was Samuel, a boy of 10 who was prone to night terrors. He would wake the dormitory with his screams, babbling about a man in the walls who whispered his name. Matron Vance would punish him for the disturbances, locking him in the pantry for hours. But other children started to hear it too. A faint scratching, a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the building, most noticeably from the floor of the windowless cellar room. These children were the canaries in the coal mine, their fragile minds the first to register the encroaching wrongness of the place. Their fears, their art, their rebellion, these were the early symptoms of the disease that had infected Blackwood Pines, a sickness that emanated from its very foundations and from the dark gospel of the man who had built it. The folklore of Hemlock's Hollow was ancient and dark, passed down in hushed warnings from one generation to the next. The elders spoke of the land itself as being sentient and hungry. They called it the hungry clay, believing the reddish soil of the valley had a thirst that water could not quench. They told tales of travelers who had wandered into the hollow and were never seen again, their footprints simply stopping in the middle of a trail, as if the ground itself had opened up and swallowed them. More specific and more terrifying was the legend of the Whispering Man. Descriptions varied, but the core elements were always the same. He was unnaturally tall and thin, a silhouette of a man who moved through the trees at the edge of sight. He had no face, only a smooth expanse of skin where his features should be. He didn't speak in a voice, but in a whisper that you felt in the marrow of your bones, a sound that could plant dark thoughts in your mind and lure you away from the safety of the firelight. When Reverend Black built his orphanage, the locals saw it as a monumental act of foolishness, or perhaps of sinister intent. They said he was building a pen and filling it with bait. They claimed the rhythmic chanting they sometimes heard drifting from the orphanage on still nights was an invitation, a summoning. Local midwife, a woman named Agnes Reed, swore she saw the children of Blackwood Pines walking in the woods at night, their eyes vacant, moving in a silent, orderly procession towards the deepest, darkest part of the hollow. She claimed they weren't being led by the Reverend, but by a towering shadow that glided ahead of them. Her stories were dismissed as the superstitious ramblings of an old woman, but in the horrifying aftermath of the vanishing, her words would be remembered with a cold, sickening clarity. The forbidden curse of the hollow was not just a story, it was a predator, and it appeared Reverend Black had just served it a feast. As the autumn of 1902 deepened, the atmosphere within Blackwood Pines grew heavier, more charged with a palpable sense of dread. The children's strange behavior escalated. The sleepwalking became a nightly occurrence. Multiple children would rise from their beds in unison, moving through the cold, dark hallways with a shared, unspoken purpose. Matron Alara Vance, a woman not easily shaken, found her rigid control beginning to fray. Her private diary, a leather-bound volume discovered weeks after the disappearance, became her only confidant. Her entries, initially focused on logistics and discipline, grew increasingly anxious and filled with a creeping horror. On October 12th, she wrote, "The children do not play anymore. They gather in the yard and stare at the tree line as if waiting for a visitor. When I ask what they are looking for, they all give the same answer: the visitor. I fear the Reverend's teachings have taken too deep a root in their minds. He calls it the Great Attunement." A week later, her fear was more pronounced. "Samuel screamed again last night, but this time it was not a nightmare. He claims the scratching from the cellar floor has become a tapping, a rhythm. He tapped it out for me on the table. It is the same rhythm as the new chant Reverend Black has taught them. God forgive me, it sounds like something answering from below." The macabre art also intensified. It wasn't just Lily's drawings anymore. Other children began carving symbols into their bedposts and scratching them onto the walls with stones, the same twisted, not quite across symbol that adorned the doorways. The orphanage was no longer just an institution. It was a pressure cooker of occult energy, meticulously orchestrated by the Reverend. The final congregation he had long promised them was drawing near, and even the unshakable Ilara Vance was beginning to understand that it was not a path to salvation, but to something else entirely, something forbidden. The first outsider to fall victim to the encroaching darkness of Hemlock's Hollow was a man named Silas Croft. He was a seasoned trapper and hunter, a man who knew the mountains better than he knew the back of his own hand. He lived a solitary life in a cabin a few miles north of the orphanage, and he viewed Reverend Black and his strange institution with a deep and abiding suspicion. In mid-October, one of Croft's traps, located near the edge of the Blackwood Pines property, was sprung, but the animal was gone. All that remained was a large, unsettling footprint that was neither animal nor entirely human, and a single, small, hand-carved wooden bird, the kind one of the orphans was known for whittling. Disturbed, Croft decided to keep a watch on the orphanage from a distance. He told his only friend, the trapper Jedediah Thorne, that he'd seen the children moving through the woods late at night in a silent procession, their faces pale and emotionless in the moonlight. He said they were gathering things, dead animals, strange roots and flat gray stones from the creek bed, and taking them to a cave hidden deep in the ridge behind the orphanage. Thorne warned him to stay away, that the place was cursed, but Croft was a stubborn man. On the evening of October 28th, Silas Croft took his rifle and his lantern and headed towards the ridge, determined to find out what macabre secrets the Reverend was hiding. He was never seen again. When Jedediah Thorne went to check on him a few days later, he found Croft's cabin empty. The hearth was cold, but a pot of stew sat on the table, covered in a thick layer of mold. The only thing out of place was a single, crude charcoal drawing on the floor. It showed a tall, faceless man leading a line of children into the mouth of a cave. At the back of the line was a smaller figure with a rifle. The vanishing of Silas Croft was the prelude, the first tremor before the earthquake that would swallow Blackwood Pines whole. Let us return to Deputy Thomas Miller, standing in the chilling silence of the abandoned orphanage on that November morning. The discovery of the child's drawing of the faceless man had solidified his dread into something cold and hard. This was no longer just a case of missing persons. He and the small posse that had followed him began a methodical, inch-by-inch search of the building, and the discoveries grew progressively more disturbing. Underneath the loose floorboards of Caleb's bed, the rebellious older boy, they found a hidden collection of objects. There was a small, crudely made knife, but also a series of burnt matches and a diary of his own. The final entries were terrifying. He wrote not of escape, but of fear. "He knows I know," one entry read. "The Reverend, he doesn't look at me with his eyes anymore, he looks with something else. The visitor is almost here. He says we have to make the house ready. He says the floor is a door." The kitchen pantry, where young Samuel was often locked away, they found the walls covered in frantic scratches. Hundreds, thousands of them, tally marks in a countdown to some unknown event. But interspersed with the marks were words, gouged into the wood with a nail or a stone. Here OPNS. Hungry, soil. The most horrifying discovery, however, came in the cellar. The windowless room that the construction workers had spoken of was at the far end, its door secured by a heavy iron bolt. When they forced it open, the air that rushed out was stale and carried a strange, metallic, earthy scent. The room was bare, the stone floor swept clean, but in the precise center of the floor the flagstones were darker, stained by something that had soaked deep into the porous rock. And etched around this stain was a massive, complex symbol, a spiraling pattern that seemed to pull the eye inwards. It was a place of ritual, a place of preparation. The children were gone, but the evidence of what had been done to them, what they had been prepared for, was only just beginning to surface. The official investigation into the Blackwood Pines disappearance quickly became the most baffling and horrifying case in the region's history. Sheriff Brody, a pragmatic and unimaginative man, initially insisted it must be a mass kidnapping for ransom, despite the lack of any note or demand. But as the days turned into a week, with no word and no trace of the 53 missing people, his theories crumbled. The search parties that scoured the surrounding woods found nothing. No tracks, no discarded scraps of clothing, no signs of a large group moving through the dense underbrush. It was as if they had been plucked from the earth by an unseen hand. The official records of Blackwood Pines were sealed, its story becoming a forbidden legend. If you believe such stories deserve to be unearthed, subscribe to our channel, because the secrets we're about to uncover were meant to stay buried forever. The town of Havenwood was seized by a quiet, simmering panic. Doors were bolted at night and children were kept close. The whispers of the old folklore, the hungry clay, the whispering man, returned with a vengeance. People began to look at the hollow with a renewed terror. Reverend Alistair Black, once seen as an eccentric but benevolent figure, was now recast as a demon, a Pied Piper who had led the town's unwanted children to some unspeakable doom. His past was a blank slate. Inquiries sent to cities back east came back with nothing, as if the man had never existed before he arrived in Appalachia. He was a ghost who had descended upon their valley, performed some macabre miracle in reverse, and vanished back into the ether, taking an entire orphanage with him. The mystery was absolute, the lack of evidence a maddening void that fueled the most terrifying speculations. They hadn't just vanished, they had been erased. As the official investigation stalled, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the situation, the focus shifted to the building itself. Blackwood Pines became a source of intense fascination and fear. Some argued it should be burned to the ground immediately, to cleanse the cursed land. Others, including Deputy Miller, felt it still held the key to the mystery. It was during a second, more thorough search of the Reverend's office that they found the hidden compartment. A loose stone in the fireplace hearth concealed a small, lead-lined box. Inside was not a confession or an explanation, but something far more unnerving, a collection of journals filled with Alistair Black's dense, spidery script. The journals were not personal diaries but academic treatises on forbidden subjects. They were filled with astronomical charts, complex mathematical equations, and detailed studies of obscure folklore from around the world, tales of gateways, thin places where the veil between worlds was weak. He wrote of ley lines and telluric currents, theorizing that Hemlock's Hollow was a powerful nexus, a place where such a doorway could, with the right preparations, be opened. His writings were chillingly lucid and methodical. He referred to the children not as his wards but as the chorus or the resonators. He believed their innocence and collective focus could generate a specific kind of psychic energy, an attunement necessary to turn the key. The final pages of his most recent journal were filled with frantic calculations and a single, repeated phrase scrawled over and over again. The convergence is nigh. The house must be fed. The silence must be answered. This wasn't a man who had fled. This was a man who had completed his life's work. The horrifying truth began to dawn on Miller. The vanishing wasn't the failure of the orphanage. It was its ultimate, macabre success. The discovery of Reverend Black's journals transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into something that felt blasphemous to even contemplate. Sheriff Brody, a man of simple faith, refused to read them, declaring them the work of a madman. But Deputy Miller, a man more haunted by questions than by easy answers, read every word. He began to piece together a timeline of the Reverend's Macabre project. Black's writings referenced a specific celestial alignment, a rare convergence of planets that he believed would occur on the night of November 6, 1902. This event, he wrote, would weaken the membrane for a few crucial hours, creating the perfect conditions for his final congregation. The children, the chorus, were the instrument. Their nightly chants, their strange games, the symbols they carved. It was all part of a long, sustained ritual designed to harmonize the psychic frequency of the orphanage with the natural energy of the hollow. He was tuning the building and its inhabitants like a strange and terrible guitar. He wrote about the cellar room in chilling detail. It was not built on ordinary ground, but directly over a spot he had identified through dowsing and esoteric measurements as the locus. The stain on the floor, he implied, was not incidental but integral, a consecration of the ground with an offering of life essence, though he never specified its source. The horrifying implication hung in the air. What other small, forgotten souls might have been sacrificed to prepare the way? The journals were a blueprint for an atrocity, a step-by-step guide to tearing a hole in the fabric of reality. Miller felt as if he were staring into the abyss, and the cold, methodical sanity of the Reverend's madness was more terrifying than any simple act of violence. While Miller delved into the Reverend's forbidden texts, another crucial piece of evidence came to light. The diary of matron Alara Vance, which had been taken as evidence, was examined more closely. Tucked into a small pocket on the inside back cover were several folded pages, torn from the main diary, as if she had hidden them there in a final, desperate act. These entries were from the last 2 days, November 5th and 6th, and her handwriting had devolved from its usual neat script into a panicked, almost illegible scrawl. On November 5th, she wrote, "He has told them. He gathered them in the chapel and told them they are going on a journey, to a new home, a silent, perfect place. They are not scared, they are eager. Caleb tried to argue, to fight. The Reverend did not touch him. He only looked at him, and Caleb fell to his knees, weeping. He says we must all be pure. He has instructed them to fast. No food, only water, the air is thick. The humming from below is constant now." Her final entry from the afternoon of November 6 was the most chilling of all. It was a testament to her final, horrifying realization of the truth. "The preparations are complete. He has taken them all down to the cellar room. They went without a sound. He called it the final congregation. I tried to stop him, to reason with him. He smiled at me, a terrible, calm smile. He said my role was complete. He said I was the shepherdess and that I had brought the flock to the gate. He thanked me. Then he locked me in my office. The chanting has begun. It is not coming from the cellar. It is coming from the walls, from the ground. The whole house is singing. God help us. It is not a door he is opening. It is a mouth." The matron's words provided the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. She wasn't a victim who vanished with the others. She was the final witness, left to record the epilogue before she too was consumed. The contents of the matron's hidden diary entries and the Reverend's journals created a deep schism between Deputy Miller and Sheriff Brody. The sheriff, unable to accept the occult reality presented to him, declared the writings inadmissible, the ravings of a lunatic and a hysterical woman. He officially closed the active search, logging the case as a mass disappearance, presumed deceased by person or persons unknown. He ordered Blackwood Pines to be shuttered, its doors and windows boarded up, effectively sealing the crime scene and its macabre secrets from the world. For the town of Havenwood, this was both a relief and a source of profound unease. They wanted the nightmare to be over, but the lack of answers left a festering wound. The orphanage became a banned subject, a name spoken only in fearful whispers. Parents used the story to frighten their children into obedience. Be good, or the man from Blackwood Pines will come for you. But Deputy Miller couldn't let it go. The horrifying logic of the Reverend's plan, the terror in the matron's final words, it had taken root in his mind. He was convinced that the answer lay not in the building, but where the building pointed. He returned to the Reverend's journals, studying the cryptic maps and astronomical charts. He cross-referenced them with the local legends Jedediah Thorne had told him, stories of caves and strange rock formations deep within the hollow. He became obsessed with a particular location that Black had marked with a complex, star-like symbol, a cave system on the far side of the ridge behind the orphanage, a place the locals called the Devil's Throat. He knew that if he was ever to find a trace of the 53 souls who had vanished, he would have to venture into the one place the old stories explicitly warned no one should ever go. Driven by a need for answers that bordered on obsession, Deputy Miller decided to organize a small, unofficial expedition. He couldn't use his authority as a lawman, as the sheriff had forbidden any further investigation. So he turned to the only men he knew who were brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to follow him. Jedediah Thorne, the old trapper who knew the woods better than anyone, and two grim-faced former miners, the Connolly brothers, men who were no strangers to the darkness below the earth. On a bitterly cold morning in early December, nearly a month after the vanishing, the four men set out for the Devil's Throat. The journey itself was ominous. The woods around the hollow were unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of birds and wildlife. The air grew colder, and a strange, low-frequency hum seemed to vibrate up through the soles of their boots, a feeling that Thorne swore he had never experienced in these mountains before. After a grueling 3-hour hike, they found the entrance to the cave system, just as depicted on the Reverend's map. It was not a single opening but a series of jagged fissures in the rock face, like a mouth with broken teeth. A foul, sulphurous air breathed out from the darkness within. The Connolly brothers, men who had spent their lives underground, exchanged a nervous glance. This was not the familiar smell of a coal mine. This was something else, something ancient and rotten. Miller lit their lanterns, the flickering flames seeming small and fragile against the immense darkness. With a shared, unspoken sense of foreboding, they stepped out of the world of sunlight and into the belly of the earth, following the path laid out for them by a madman. The initial passages of the cave were tight and claustrophobic, the rock slick with a strange, dark slime that seemed to absorb the light from their lanterns. The air was thick and hard to breathe, and the low hum they had felt outside was now an audible, resonant drone that seemed to come from all directions at once. After about 20 minutes of careful progress, the narrow tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and here they found the first definitive proof that they were on the right path. Leaning against a rock wall was a single small crutch, one that Miller recognized as belonging to a young boy at the orphanage named Timothy. A little further in, they found a tattered piece of blue ribbon, identical to one he had seen in a girl's hair in an old photograph of the orphans. The 53 hadn't simply vanished from the building, they had come here. Why? Were they led here under duress? Or did they come willingly as part of the Reverend's journey? As they pushed deeper, the signs became more frequent and more personal. A child's doll, its porcelain face cracked, lay half buried in the mud. A small, worn Bible, its pages swollen and warped by the damp. These were not signs of a struggle. The items seemed to have been discarded, placed carefully, almost reverently, on the cavern floor. It was as if the children were shedding their former lives, piece by piece, as they walked further into the darkness. Jedediah Thorne, a man not prone to panic, stopped and held up his hand. "Listen," he whispered. The humming had changed. It was no longer a monotone drone. It now had a strange, almost melodic cadence, a rhythm. It was the same rhythm Samuel had tried to describe to Matron Vance, the tapping that answered from below the cellar floor. They were getting closer to the source. The cave system twisted deeper into the mountain, a labyrinth of passages that would have been impossible to navigate without the Reverend's map. The air grew progressively colder, a deep, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. It was a cold that felt ancient, a cold that leached the warmth from their very bones. The Connolly brothers, with their miner's instincts, noted something deeply disturbing. The rock formations were wrong. The strata were twisted and contorted in ways that defied geology, as if some immense heat or pressure had once warped the very stone. They also pointed out the complete absence of any life. No bats, no cave crickets, not even moss or lichen on the walls. It was a sterile, dead environment. Then they entered a vast cavern, so large their lanterns could not illuminate the far wall or the ceiling. The floor here was not mud or rock, but a fine, gray dust that puffed up around their boots. In the center of this massive chamber stood a crude, altar-like structure built of flat, stacked stones. It was here they found the most intimate and horrifying collection of artifacts yet. Neatly piled on and around the altar were the personal belongings of every single person from Blackwood Pines. Shoes, coats, spectacles, hair combs, pocket knives, and children's toys. It was all there. And atop the pile, placed with ceremonial care, was Reverend Alistair Black's pocket watch and Matron Vance's iron-gray shawl. It was a chilling, silent testament. It confirmed that all 53 had reached this point. It was a mass grave, but without any bodies. They had arrived at this spot and then, what? They had divested themselves of all their worldly possessions, every last link to their past lives, and prepared for the final step of their journey. The humming was louder here, a physical pressure against their eardrums, and it seemed to emanate directly from the stone altar itself. The mystery had reached its horrifying apex. Staring at the pile of abandoned belongings, Deputy Miller finally understood. This was not an abduction. It was a departure, a planned, ritualistic exodus. The children and staff of Blackwood Pines had walked into this cave, traveled to this chamber, and systematically removed every last piece of their identity before taking one final, irrevocable step into the unknown. The question was no longer where they had gone, but what they had become. The scene was devoid of any forensic evidence of their fate. No blood, no bones, no signs of a struggle. The fine gray dust that covered the floor was undisturbed, save for their own footprints, as if the 53 people had simply floated away. One of the Connolly brothers, holding his lantern high, let out a choked cry and pointed towards the far wall of the cavern. As their eyes adjusted to the flickering light, they could just make out a vast, intricate pattern covering the entire rock face. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a carving, a colossal, spiraling symbol that mirrored the one on the cellar floor of the orphanage, but this one was infinitely more complex. It seemed to writhe and shift in the lantern light, a dizzying, hypnotic pattern that made the men feel nauseous and disoriented. At the very center of this spiral, the rock was not carved but seemed to be melted. The stone was smooth and black like obsidian, and it swirled into a point of absolute darkness that seemed to drink the light. It was not a carving. It was a scar. The men stood in stunned, horrified silence. They had not found a crime scene. They had found the aftermath of a forbidden ceremony, a place where a door had been forced open, a wound inflicted upon the world itself. The humming intensified, the air crackled with a static charge, and for a terrifying moment, Miller thought he could see the black spot on the wall ripple, as if it were a surface of dark water. Jedediah Thorne was the first to break the horrified trance. He grabbed Miller's arm, his face a mask of primal fear. "We have to leave," he hissed, his voice tight with panic. "This ain't a place for men. The ground ain't right." The Connolly brothers needed no convincing. They were already backing away, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the pulsating darkness at the center of the carved spiral. The oppressive atmosphere of the cavern was becoming physically unbearable. The air felt thin, and the constant, low-frequency hum was causing their teeth to ache and their vision to swim. As they turned to leave, Miller's lantern beam swept across the base of the altar one last time. He saw something he had missed before, tucked away beneath a fold of the matron's shawl. It was a book, Lily's sketchbook. He hesitated for only a second before grabbing it. It felt cold to the touch, unnaturally so. They fled the chamber, their hurried footsteps echoing in the vast, dead space. They didn't stop, didn't speak, until they were back in the narrow passages, the oppressive weight of the great cavern behind them. The journey back to the surface was a blur of frantic, fear-fueled movement. When they finally stumbled out of the cave's mouth, gasping in the crisp December air, the afternoon sun seemed impossibly bright, a sight so wholesome and normal it was almost painful to look at. They had been inside for less than 3 hours, but it felt as if they had been gone for an eternity. They had descended into the earth seeking answers and had found only a deeper, more profound, and infinitely more disturbing mystery. They had looked into the Reverend's doorway, and the silence that stared back was absolute and terrifying. Back in the relative sanity of his small office, with the door locked and a bottle of whiskey on his desk, Deputy Miller opened Lily's sketchbook. He handled it as if it were a venomous snake, half expecting the charcoal drawings to move on their own. The early pages were as he remembered: birds, trees, the looming faceless man. But the final dozen pages were new, drawn in the last days, perhaps even the final hours at Blackwood Pines. The drawings were more frantic, more abstract. They depicted the children holding hands, their faces blank and their eyes empty, standing in a circle. They showed the spiral symbol from the cellar floor, and then the much larger one from the cave wall. But the last drawing was the one that would haunt Miller for the rest of his days. It was the only drawing that depicted the faceless man, the visitor up close. It filled the entire page. The figure was still tall and impossibly thin, but it was no longer just a silhouette. The drawing showed texture, a surface that was not cloth or skin but something that looked like cracked bark or dried mud. Its long, spindly fingers ended in sharp points, and its face, while still devoid of features, was not blank. In the place where a mouth should be, there was a detailed drawing of the spiral symbol. The symbol was not on its face, the symbol was its face. It was a mouth, a maw, a vortex. Beneath the horrifying drawing, a single, shakily written word was scrawled in a child's hand: home. Miller slammed the book shut, his heart hammering against his ribs. The vanishing was not an end. It was a beginning. It was a homecoming. They hadn't been taken. They had been welcomed. The horrifying, inescapable conclusion was that the children of Blackwood Pines were not victims of the monster. They were its acolytes. The four men who had entered the Devil's Throat cave system made a pact of silence. Jedediah Thorne and the Connolly brothers wanted nothing more than to forget what they had seen. The things in that cavern defied the laws of God and nature, and they were simple men who had no framework to process such horrors. They would never speak of the altar, the pile of clothes, or the great, swirling scar on the rock. Deputy Miller agreed, but for different reasons. He knew that no one would believe him. He could not present Lily's Macabre sketchbook or the Reverend's occult journals as evidence. He would be branded a lunatic, stripped of his badge and ostracized. The truth of Blackwood Pines was simply too monstrous, too far outside the realm of accepted reality, for the world to handle. The official story would remain: 53 souls vanished without a trace, the victims of an unknown crime. The case was destined to become a permanent, unsolved fixture in the annals of Appalachian cold cases. Miller locked the journals and the sketchbook away in a heavy iron box, burying them beneath a pile of old case files, a hidden cancer in the town's recorded history. He had looked into the abyss, and now the abyss was a part of him. He began to suffer from nightmares, waking in a cold sweat with the image of the spiral-mouthed figure burned into his mind. He would hear a low humming in the dead of night and find himself staring out the window towards the dark, brooding silhouette of the mountains that cradled Hemlock's Hollow. The story was over, but the dread was a living thing, and it had followed him out of the cave. The fate of the Blackwood Pines foundling home building itself became a point of contention in the town of Havenwood. For months, it stood silent and empty on the hill, a monument to the tragedy that had befallen the community. Its windows were boarded, its doors chained, but its presence was a constant, nagging reminder of the unanswered questions and the lingering fear. Children would dare each other to run up and touch its cold stone walls, only to flee in terror. Travelers would make detours of several miles to avoid passing it after dark. Some claimed to see faint lights moving inside the boarded-up windows on moonless nights, or to hear the faint, discordant chanting of children on the wind. The building had become more than just an abandoned structure. It had become a genuine haunted house, a focal point for all the fear and superstition that the vanishing had unleashed. The town council debated what to do. Some argued it should be preserved as a memorial. Others, a more fearful and vocal majority, demanded its destruction. They believed that whatever evil had been summoned there by Reverend Black still lingered within its walls, that the building itself was infected, a blight upon the land that needed to be purged with fire. The debate raged through the spring and summer of 1903, the orphanage looming over the town like a silent, gray judge. Its macabre story was not yet finished. The final act was yet to play out, and it would be one of fire and ash. The decision was finally made for them. In the autumn of 1903, almost a year to the day after the disappearance, a group of men from the town, their courage bolstered by whiskey and their hearts filled with a righteous, terrified fury, took matters into their own hands. They rode up to Blackwood Pines in the dead of night, armed with torches and cans of kerosene. They saw it as an exorcism. They were not just burning a building. They were fighting back against the darkness that had stolen 53 souls and poisoned their valley with fear. They smashed the remaining windows, doused the dry wooden floors and furniture, and set the orphanage ablaze. The fire was immense, a towering inferno that could be seen for miles. It lit up the night sky, turning Hemlock's Hollow from a place of shadow into a roaring furnace. The flames consumed the dining hall where cold porridge still sat in bowls, the dormitory with its hastily abandoned beds, and the cellar with its stained and scarred stone floor. The townsfolk who gathered on the distant hills to watch cheered as the roof collapsed, sending a shower of embers into the sky. They believed they were erasing the stain, closing a dark chapter in their history. But as Deputy Miller stood among them, watching the fire gut the building that had consumed his life for the past year, he felt no sense of relief. He knew they weren't destroying the evil. They were just destroying the evidence. The fire could not touch the cave deep in the mountain, nor could it erase the horrifying truth he carried. The door had been opened, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that burning the welcome mat would not make it close. In the years that followed, the story of the Blackwood Pines foundling home calcified into a legendary cold case, a piece of dark American folklore. The official records remained sealed, and the memories of the witnesses faded or were willfully suppressed. Hemlock's Hollow was abandoned by all but the most stubborn and isolated families. The path to the burned-out ruins of the orphanage became overgrown, and nature began the slow, inexorable process of reclaiming the land. But the legend persisted. It became a ghost story told around campfires, a cautionary tale about the dangers of the deep woods and of charismatic strangers with dark eyes. The details shifted with each telling. In some versions, the children were murdered by the Reverend. In others, they were sold into a secret, unholy servitude. The most macabre versions, however, the ones whispered by those who remembered the old folklore, were closer to the truth. They said the children were not dead, but had been called home by the ancient spirit of the Hollow, the whispering man who had finally been given the offering he had long craved. The story of the orphanage that vanished overnight became a permanent, jagged scar on the psyche of the region. It was a story with no bodies, no culprits, and no resolution, only a vast, terrifying emptiness. This is the point where the official history ends, and the macabre speculation begins. We dive into the darkness that history tries to forget. If that's what you're here for, consider becoming a channel member for more exclusive deep dives into cold cases that defy explanation. The truth, buried in an iron box in a dusty town hall, was far more horrifying than any ghost story. What became of Deputy Thomas Miller? The man who came closer than anyone to the horrifying truth of Blackwood Pines was irrevocably changed by it. He remained the deputy in Havenwood for another 5 years, but the townspeople noted the transformation. He became quiet and withdrawn, a haunted man who rarely smiled. He took to patrolling the perimeter of Hemlock's Hollow, not as a lawman, but as a sentinel, a silent guardian standing watch over a sealed and forbidden place. He was plagued by insomnia and what the town doctor called a severe nervous affliction. He would often be seen in the town's small library, poring over old maps and books on local history, searching for any other mention of the symbols he had seen, any other hint of the forbidden knowledge that Reverend Black had unearthed. In 1908, he abruptly resigned from his position and left Havenwood without a word of explanation. His landlady found his room empty, save for a single, heavy iron box left on the floor. He left no forwarding address. For years, rumors would surface of a man fitting his description being seen in other remote, isolated towns, always near places with strange local legends and whispers of disappearances. It seemed Thomas Miller had not run from the mystery, but had chosen to chase it, dedicating his life to understanding the darkness he had stumbled upon. He had become a hunter of shadows, forever searching for another door, another key, determined that what happened at Blackwood Pines would never happen again. Or perhaps he was simply searching for a way to close the door that he knew in his heart remained horrifyingly ajar. The legacy of Reverend Alistair Black is one of terrifying absence. A man with no past, who orchestrated one of the most macabre and inexplicable events in American history and then vanished utterly. Was he a madman? A charlatan who somehow hypnotized an entire orphanage into a mass suicide pact? Or was he something far more sinister? His journals suggest a man of incredible intellect and singular, terrifying purpose. He was not insane. He was a meticulous researcher, a scholar of the forbidden. He saw the world not as a place of matter and physics, but as a series of frequencies and vibrations, a tapestry of unseen energies that could be manipulated. He saw the orphans not as children to be cared for, but as tools, as biological resonators to be tuned for a specific, arcane purpose. In his worldview, he was not a villain. He was a pioneer, an explorer on the verge of the ultimate discovery, a bridge to another reality. He believed the silent, perfect place he promised the children was real, a higher plane of existence beyond the pain and suffering of the mortal world. Was he successful? Did he and his chorus successfully cross over into this other dimension? Or did they simply open a door to a place of unimaginable horror and were consumed by what they found on the other side? There is no way to know. Alistair Black remains a phantom, a ghost in the historical record, his true identity and motives as blank and unknowable as the face of the entity he seemingly worshipped. He is a testament to the horrifying potential of a brilliant mind untethered from morality, a man who saw humanity as nothing more than a key to unlock a forbidden door. Let us consider the most disturbing element of this entire macabre affair, the children. What was their experience in those final days? Matron Vance's diary suggests they were not frightened but eager. Lily's final drawing labels the terrifying spiral-mouthed entity as home. This leads to a horrifying conclusion. The children were not unwilling victims. They were converts. They were believers. Over the course of 3 years, Reverend Black had systematically dismantled their identities, erased their past traumas, and replaced them with his own dark gospel. He offered them what they had never had, a sense of belonging, a shared purpose, and the promise of a special destiny. To these forgotten, unloved children, the promise of a silent, perfect place may have sounded like paradise. He didn't drag them into the darkness. He convinced them that the darkness was light. The chanting, the games, the rituals, it was all a form of psychological conditioning, slowly attuning them to the alien frequency he was trying to contact. By the end, they were a unified consciousness, a chorus moving and thinking as one, their individual wills subsumed into the greater purpose of the final congregation. The true horror of Blackwood Pines is not just that 53 people vanished, but that 47 of them were children who may have walked willingly, even joyfully, into a complete and utter annihilation of their existence, convinced it was their salvation. It is a deeply disturbing thought that the most vulnerable among us could be so completely and successfully indoctrinated into welcoming their own incomprehensible end. The physical evidence left behind at Blackwood Pines, the journals, the diaries, the sketchbooks, was locked away, but the intangible evidence, the stories, took on a life of their own. Over the decades, Hemlock's Hollow became a dark tourism destination for paranormal investigators and thrill-seekers. They would camp near the scorched foundation of the orphanage, using modern ghost-hunting equipment to search for echoes of the past. Many reported strange phenomena, disembodied whispers caught on audio recorders, electronic equipment failing without cause, and feelings of intense dread and paranoia. Some have even claimed to capture photographs of strange, misty figures among the trees, or to have seen fleeting glimpses of a tall, shadowy shape moving at the edge of their vision. In the 1970s, a team of university parapsychologists conducted a multi-night investigation. Their official report concluded that the area exhibited significant and unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations and infrasound phenomena, the same low-frequency hum that Miller and his party had experienced. They documented feelings of acute anxiety, disorientation, and auditory hallucinations among their team members, particularly near the location of the Devil's Throat cave system. While they captured no definitive proof of the paranormal, their findings suggest that whatever ritual Reverend Black conducted on that November night in 1902 left a permanent scar on the environment itself. The place is not just haunted by ghosts. The very fabric of reality in Hemlock's Hollow may be thinner, more frayed, forever warped by the forbidden act that took place there. The hum remains, a constant, subliminal reminder of the door that was opened. The mystery of Blackwood Pines is a cold case that transcends simple criminal investigation. It exists at the unsettling intersection of history, folklore, and forbidden science. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of reality and the hidden potential that may lie dormant in the world around us. Could a place, a locus, as the Reverend called it, truly hold a concentration of telluric energy? Could a group of human minds, focused with singular intent, actually influence the physical world in such a profound way? Modern physics speaks of quantum entanglement, string theory, and the possibility of multiple dimensions. These are concepts that, while scientifically rigorous, sound not dissimilar to the arcane theories Reverend Black was exploring in his journals. He was a man out of time, a quantum physicist working with the tools of occultism. Perhaps his methods were esoteric, but his goal, to breach the barrier between worlds, is a recurring theme in both ancient mythology and cutting-edge science. The story of Blackwood Pines is so enduringly horrifying because it refuses to be easily categorized. It is too strange for history, too methodical for folklore. It occupies a chilling gray area that suggests the superstitions of our ancestors and the theories of our physicists may be describing the very same thing, using different languages. It whispers a forbidden truth, that the veil between our world and another may be far more fragile than we believe, and that all it takes is the right key, in the right place, at the right time, to tear it open. There have been other cases, whispers and echoes throughout history, that bear a disturbing resemblance to the Blackwood Pines vanishing. The lost colony of Roanoke, where 117 settlers disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the cryptic word Croatoan carved into a post. The unexplained disappearance of the crew of the Mary Celeste, a ship found sailing with its cargo intact but not a soul on board. The legend of the lost village of Angakuni in Canada, where in 1930 a trapper claimed to have found an entire Inuit settlement completely abandoned, with food still cooking over fires. In all these cases, the defining feature is the same horrifying silence, the same lack of struggle, the same sense of an orderly, inexplicable evaporation of human life. Are these isolated, unrelated tragedies, or are they data points in a larger, more terrifying pattern? Could it be that Alistair Black was not an innovator, but merely a man who had rediscovered an ancient and dangerous knowledge, a forbidden technology of ascension, or perhaps of consumption? When viewed through the lens of Blackwood Pines, these other historical mysteries take on a darker, more sinister hue. They cease to be simple disappearances and become potential instances of the same macabre phenomenon. It is a chilling thought that throughout human history, there may have been others like Reverend Black, other shepherds who have found other flocks, and other doorways standing silently in the dark and forgotten places of the world, waiting to be fed. The ultimate question that lingers over the ashes of Blackwood Pines is a simple one. What was the visitor? Was it a literal entity, a being from another dimension that Reverend Black managed to contact and summon? Was it the local embodiment of the Whispering Man legend, an ancient spirit of the hollow that Black made a pact with? Or was it something even more abstract? In his journals, Black sometimes referred to it not as a being, but as the Great Silence. He wrote of it as a state of being, a fundamental force of the universe, an entropy so profound that it represented the ultimate peace, the cessation of all struggle and thought. Perhaps the visitor was not a creature that came to take the children, but a principle that they were absorbed into, a void. This interpretation is, in many ways, the most macabre. It suggests that the children were not led to a new life in another world but were simply unmade. Their consciousness, their very existence, was systematically dissolved and fed into this silence. They were an offering to nothingness. The spiral symbol, then, is not a doorway but a drain, a vortex pulling everything into a central point of non-existence. This would explain the profound lack of evidence, the absolute erasure. You cannot find the remains of something that has ceased to exist on a fundamental level. The children of Blackwood Pines were not murdered, nor did they ascend. They were deleted from the universe, and the horrifying silence they left behind is the only proof that they were ever there at all. In 1998, a logging company began surveying the land in and around Hemlock's Hollow. During their work, they inadvertently rediscovered the entrance to the Devil's Throat cave system, which had been buried by a landslide decades earlier. A team of geologists and spelunkers was sent in to map the system. They documented the vast central cavern and noted the strange, melted rock formation and the colossal carving on the wall, which they classified as a highly unusual, possibly man-made petroglyph of unknown origin. They found no altar and no pile of belongings. The flash floods that had likely caused the landslide that sealed the cave would have washed all of that away. But they did report one final, unsettling detail. Deep within the fine gray dust that still coated parts of the cavern floor, they found something the original search party had missed. Footprints, dozens of them. They were small, barefoot prints, the size of children. They were not pointed towards the carved wall as one might expect. Instead, all of the footprints, without exception, were pointed away from it, leading from the base of the great spiral carving back towards the cave entrance. It was a discovery that made no sense. It was as if the children had not walked into the wall but had walked out of it. The report made no attempt to explain this impossibility, logging it simply as a curious anomaly. But for those who know the full, forbidden story of Blackwood Pines, this detail is perhaps the most horrifying clue of all. It suggests the journey was not a one-way trip. It suggests that something, or someone, came back. The implications of that final, anomalous discovery are chilling to contemplate. If the footprints were leading out, what does that mean? Did the ritual fail? Were the children sent back, changed and altered by their experience, to wander out of the cave and into the unforgiving wilderness, to perish in the cold? This seems unlikely, as no remains were ever found in the surrounding valley. Or does it suggest something far more sinister? Perhaps the ritual worked perfectly. Perhaps the children were sent through, and what came back was no longer human. Perhaps they were now vessels, empty shells inhabited by something else, something from the other side of the doorway. This theory would transform the story from a tragic disappearance into the beginning of a silent, horrifying invasion. 47 empty, child-shaped things, walking out of a cave in the heart of Appalachia, free to disperse into the world, their true nature hidden behind familiar faces. It is a profoundly disturbing thought. It means the story of Blackwood Pines did not end in 1902. It is a story that is still unfolding, silently and invisibly all around us. The children of Blackwood Pines did not vanish. They were replaced. They became the quiet strangers, the children with old eyes, the ones who stand and stare at the tree line, as if waiting for a visitor they know is coming. Today, the land where the Blackwood Pines foundling home once stood is part of a state forest. The scorched foundation is still there, a faint, rectangular outline in the earth, almost completely swallowed by weeds and young trees. There are no signs, no memorials. History has done its best to forget. The entrance to the Devil's Throat cave is now sealed with concrete and steel by the state, citing geological instability as the official reason. But the locals know the truth. They know it was sealed to keep people out or perhaps to keep something in. The legend persists, a quiet, stubborn stain that will not wash away. They say that on cold November nights, if you stand on the ridge overlooking the hollow, you can still hear the faint sound of children singing, a strange, rhythmic chant that drifts on the wind. They say the humming never truly stopped, that if you press your ear to the ground, you can still feel it, a deep, resonant vibration from the heart of the mountain. The story of the orphanage that vanished overnight remains Appalachia's most terrifying and enduring cold case. It is a perfect mystery, a vacuum of facts into which our darkest fears can rush. It serves as a chilling reminder that there are still dark corners of this country, ancient places with old rules, where the veil is thin. And sometimes, when the stars are right and the whispers are answered, that veil can be torn open, and an entire world can be lost in the silence that follows. The ultimate truth of what happened to the 53 souls of Blackwood Pines is lost to time, buried under a century of silence, speculation, and fear. The only certainty is that on the morning of November 7th, 1902, they were gone. All we are left with are the echoes, the desperate scribblings in a matron's diary, the mad genius in a reverend's journal, and the horrifying final drawing in a child's sketchbook. We are left with the image of an empty dining hall, of unmade beds, and of a strange, spiral symbol carved into a cave wall deep beneath the earth. Was it a mass abduction, a ritualistic sacrifice, a successful journey to another dimension, or the unleashing of something that should have remained locked away? Perhaps the answer does not matter. The story of Blackwood Pines serves its purpose not as a solvable case, but as a piece of forbidden history, a stark and macabre warning. It warns us that the abyss is real, and that there are those who will not only stare into it but will try to build a bridge across it, using the innocent as their timber. The hollow is quiet now, but it is not an empty quiet. It is a watchful quiet, a waiting quiet, and one cannot help but wonder, as the wind sighs through the skeletal trees, if the door that Reverend Alistair Black opened was ever truly closed.